NBC Sports Radio AM 1060 is KDUS Tempe Phoenix and KUPD HD2 Tempe Phoenix.
And welcome to Real Hockey Talk right here on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060. Greg Isaac alongside Jimmy Marshall, and of course our great producer Kevin. And Jimmy, we have this brand new, fantastic studio here. First time we've been in, we're always out on location, but wow, this is gorgeous.
This is a nice studio. These guys who work on a regular basis, Kevin on a regular basis, this is going to be much nicer than where they came from, and it's definitely state of the art. So we'll enjoy the next 3 hours, I guess, sitting in here and looking at the views, a little different views and everything, and we're going to talk some hockey.
Absolutely, yeah. First couple hours, as you said, real hockey talk, and we'll talk about the NHL draft, and then from 3 to 4, we'll talk a lot of NBA draft, baseball, Diamondbacks, all that good stuff. Ed Smith is also going to be joining us in studio, former NFL player, professional baseball player, man of many talents. So it's going to be really exciting. But kicking off the show, joining us is one of the Dave Isaacs, of course. There's a Dave Isaac that you guys know out here in Phoenix, but there's also a Dave Isaac from Philly. And kicking things off is Dave Isaac from Philly. And Dave, it's been a while.
It has. Dave Isaac from Philly in Buffalo. Yeah.
There you go, yeah. So both the Dave Isaacs joining forces in Buffalo for the NHL draft, which, has concluded now. But, Dave, it's sort of an interesting time. History was made with Austin Matthews going first overall. Now, obviously, being from Scottsdale, being out here, it's just amazing how hockey has really been taking off over the many years here on the West Coast and in Arizona, which actually youth hockey really for the last 20 years has been great in the West, but now really showing to everyone out there. But any extra buzz there at the draft in Buffalo about, Austin Matthews, because of where he grew up?
Well, certainly a little bit because of where he grew up, but a lot because of where he was selected in the draft, going first overall to the Toronto Maple Leafs, probably the biggest media market in the entire NHL. So he was getting tons of attention. But you're right, talking about youth hockey and I don't know what the correct term is, maybe non-traditional markets, like you're saying there in Arizona. And yesterday in the first round, there were 5 players selected from the St. Louis area. So it's a great time for USA Hockey. I was meeting with some of the folks from USA Hockey this morning, and they said that they've hit record numbers in terms of attendance in the USA Hockey program and a record number at the lowest age level from the 6 to 8-year-olds. So they're getting into the sport even younger now, which obviously, you get more talent, more practice time, and things of that nature, and that's how you get a bunch of Americans being taken so early in the draft.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it was amazing hearing about St. Louis as well. And, later on in the draft, even, other, not just American players, but other, Arizona, situations. And so it's just exciting to really see this. And, we see kids from Southern California drafted as well. And just the big takeoff that 99 did in 1988, when he got traded to L.A., obviously, hockey started booming there, and then the Sun Belt teams come in, and with the Coyotes joining them, the other California teams, all that good stuff. And youth hockey really began taking off there. And I, again, remember out here when I was playing youth hockey, even in the 90s there, just right around the time the Coyotes moved here. But even before that, I recall, just, teams up there in Canada and the East Coast, knew about some of the Phoenix teams coming in, and the talent level was already amazing. And so great to see that there, especially with Austin Matthews. And, now, Dave, with the Flyers, of course, you're covering the Flyers. And last year, got into the playoff spot after a tough start to the year. But what's really in store for them this offseason, to kind of keep pace? Because it's a tough Metropolitan Division, and, teams in the Atlantic Division as well will be looking to improve. And what do the Flyers really need to do to kind of keep pace and get back into the playoffs for the second year in a row?
Well, Greg, I think the first thing that they need to do is find a big scoring winger in free agency, and that's probably not going to come at a price that Ron Hextall's comfortable with. So it'll be interesting to see if they actually do that, or if they kind of play it cheap and bring one of their young players in or something like that. That's what'll keep them kind of in the conversation and not taking a step back, which I think they're kind of in danger of doing when you look at the landscape of the rest of the Metropolitan Division. The Stanley Cup champion is in the Metropolitan Division now, the Pittsburgh Penguins. So the Flyers certainly need to keep pace, and I think that's going to be the first step for them in doing so.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it's just tough. Yeah, when with free agency and all the cap situations around the National Hockey League, the teams close to the cap, and and then you have the teams that have a lot of room available, but sometimes they're not contenders. So it's a kind of a interesting situation that goes on with that. And of course, we're speaking with Dave Isaac at Dave G. Isaac on Twitter, and of course covering the Philadelphia Flyers for the Courier-Post. And now, looking at that, as you mentioned, with the price range of free agents out there, and with what Ron Hextall may be comfortable with, I mean, do you see, because he's a guy that would seem to fit the Flyer style, plus he played on LA last year, and we know about the unofficial partnership they have, but Milan Lucic is a possibility, maybe that guy that they try to maybe put more money at than maybe they normally would? Or do you see a situation because of Lucic being a power forward in the fact that sometimes that style of play affects guys where once they hit their early 30s, they already slow down a bit, could be an issue? Or, what do you think about a guy like that?
Yeah, I don't know if the age and the tread in the tires is as much of a problem as term and price on a contract like that would be for Ron Hextall. And it'll be really interesting to see what happens for some of these teams that are in bad situations this summer, what they do in free agency and the players that they bring in, because there's going to be a protection list for the expansion draft in Las Vegas next summer. And I think there are probably some teams that are a little wary of acquiring somebody and then losing them a year later if they don't protect them. So if the Flyers, were to pony up big money and pay Milan Lucic, I would certainly think that they would protect him. But I don't believe Ron Hextall is willing to do something like that. So I would be surprised if Lucic ended up being a Flyer at the start of next season. Certainly, I think he's looking at a smaller price. I think Jimmy Vesey is really the guy that is top of the Flyers list, the winger that was drafted by Nashville and already declared that he wouldn't sign with them, and he'll become a free agent on August 15th because he'll be a restricted free agent. But that's kind of more Ron Hextall's wheelhouse, a guy with a high upside and an entry-level contract that wouldn't break the bank.
Now, with VC, his rights when traded to Buffalo a week or so ago, do you think that he's, Buffalo, even though they have a lot of young assets, so giving up the third-round pick to them, to Nashville, probably isn't the end of the world, but is there confidence that you feel that he probably will end up signing now with Buffalo, or maybe hope, as you said, because of the Flyers' interest in him, that perhaps he doesn't sign there and still becomes a free agent there? I think it would be August 15th for him.
Yeah, I think it's not just the Flyers. I think every team's going to have interest in him, and his representatives have already come out and said that that trade didn't change anything, even though he's good buddies with Jack Eichel, the Buffalo Sabres, that they still expect that Jimmy Vesey will become a free agent on August 15th. And it's an interesting scenario because he's going to be an entry-level contract. Everybody is going to load that contract up with bonuses. The contract itself is going to be pretty much identical wherever it is that he goes. So it's a free agent that's not necessarily looking for a payday. He's looking for the best fit and for a team that's in a good situation to win. And that's kind of rare. You're usually looking at somebody who's trying to pitch both against one another, both the opportunity to win and money. And here it's just going to be the opportunity to win, or whatever he feels is the best fit, whether it's the Boston Bruins, where he went to college in Boston, or or somewhere else, it'll be interesting to see what exactly happens there. But it sounds like he's going to become a free agent one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely, with VC there. And in terms of the trade route, with the Flyers, do they have excess young defensemen or the type of assets out there that can acquire, if available, maybe a 24, 25-year-old forward if they're not able to sign VC, that could get into their top six? I mean, are those assets there to make a deal of that magnitude if the right guy's available?
If the right guy's available, they might be able to pull it off with one of their young defensemen. The Flyers do have a lot of them. I would think Ivan Provorov, who they selected 7th overall last year, is probably going to make the team this year. I think he's untouchable. Shane Gostisbehere, who was one of the finalists for the Calder Trophy, he's obviously untouchable as well. As for the rest of them, I suppose if something really stuck out at Ron Hextall, he might do something like that. But I think that in terms of roster players that are on there right now, they're not really good fits for anybody because of some of the contracts that these guys have. I don't see too many teams breaking down the door to trade for Matt Reed or to trade for Mark Streit. So I don't think that Ron Hextall has that many assets available to him in terms of a trade if he's looking to retain his young players. It'll be interesting to see what happens. It's not quite the same scenario as the Coyotes, who picked up Tony DeAngelo today because he's the guy that only spent 1 year in the AHL and was already pining for playing time.
Hi, Dave. I wanted to ask you, just like last year, the Flyers, they were active on the first night of the draft. Instead of moving up, they moved down, and they got the guy that they wanted. Now, everybody always says that, but I'll let you pronounce his full name. Out of all, I think they have 10 draft picks. Do they expect any of them to come in immediately and help out the Flyers, or are we talking maybe a year for some of these guys, or how's it looking for?
Yeah, at least a year. They ended up with 11 draft picks, and they traded one to the Islanders, and they'll get it back next year. So they ended up with 10 draft selections. And the guy that they selected was German Rubtsov, who's a Russian center. And he ended up falling in a lot of teams' draft boards because there was a scandal with the Russian junior team a couple of months ago, in a doping scandal where the coaching staff ended up giving a specific drug to every player, and they all were tested positive for the same drug, and the entire team was replaced. So that caused him to fall in a lot of people's draft boards, but apparently the Flyers went in and did some intensive research on this guy, and the Flyers liked everything that they saw, so they ended up turning a third-round pick into a second-round pick and falling 4 spots back and got the guy anyway. And you're right, that's at least what Ron Hextall is telling us, but getting to know him a little bit and the way that he was talking about all this research he was doing, he said it was more research than he's ever done on anything before. It sounds like a story that checks out, but he still has 2 years left on his contract in Russia. He's trying to get out of it, but the Flyers aren't optimistic that that's going to be the case. So even if he could, he wouldn't be in the NHL next season, certainly. But I think it's at least 2 years for all of these guys that they traded or that they drafted yesterday and today.
One guy that I was a little surprised at, because they drafted 3 goalies last year, wasn't it? They took Carter Hart, and if I'm reading correctly, it wasn't he the first goalie taken, and then maybe a little surprised if the Flyers took another goalie.
Yeah, I mean, I was at the time, but Ron Hextall said there was a certain point where he kept falling and we just couldn't ignore him, and he was still there, and the Flyers took him. It wasn't part of their plan, but it was the guy that they talked about for the last couple of weeks, and when he was still there, where he was in the second round there, they said, you know what, we just got to take him. And Ron Hextall's usually pretty low-key in how he talks about expectations for a lot of these guys. But he said that Carter Hart has the makings of a number 1 goaltender one day. So that, to me, spoke volumes, because that's something that he's not usually willing to say. So the fact that he wasn't part of the plan, Carter Hart, from the start, and that the Flyers jumped on him when they did, and Ron Hextall saying that, obviously they're very high on this guy. But I think, like I said, all of these guys are going to take at least a couple of years. Hart's, I believe, 18 years old. He's part of the Canadian national junior camp a couple of weeks ago. So the World Juniors coming up this year. He's got a shot at being on that roster, and we'll see what happens from there.
Oh, yeah, especially, as you said, with goaltenders, take longer to develop. And, developing these guys properly at any position, as you said, usually a couple of years, and you'll start seeing some of them reach the NHL level. And, of course, we're speaking with Dave Isaac, covering the Flyers for the Courier-Post. On Twitter, Dave G. Isaac, and of course we're related somehow. I don't know if we know for sure if it's like third cousins, once removed. You have the other Dave Isaac out there in Buffalo as well, and he's calling in, but we'll kind of split you guys up a little to avoid extra confusion. So one last question, Dave from Philly, but in terms of buzz at the draft, obviously with some of the players, Austin Matthews, guys drafted, and obviously what Columbus did, and the fact kind of passing over Pajari, going for Dubois. Was there buzz about a certain team or two that kind of stood out around other media out there that, people were impressed by or just shocked by? I mean, obviously maybe the Columbus situation, but anything else that kind of stood out to you or any of the other media there?
I think the Columbus thing stuck out a little bit. I think Matthew Tkachuk going to Calgary seemed like a good fit to a lot of people. It's really difficult to tell in the NHL. I think it's difficult to tell in the NFL when you start trying to evaluate a draft so early. And in the NFL, at least a lot of those guys are impactful players on that team the next year. With hockey, there's usually, maybe 3 guys in the first round that end up playing in the NHL that next season. So it's one of those things where, several years down the line, you'll be able to look back and say, man, that was a really good draft, or that was a really poor draft, or can you believe that this guy ended up getting picked in the 4th round and he's one of the top players in the game? I mean, the game ends up changing. I mean, back when he was drafted, Johnny Gaudreau, a lot of teams we're looking at him like, can't afford to take a small guy that soon, as the Calgary Flames did in the 3rd round, or the 4th round rather. But now he's obviously one of the best players in the game. So I think it's tough to try and handicap all that right now. I don't think there's many teams that a lot of media members are looking at and saying, man, they had a really good draft. I think it's just too difficult to project all of those players because there's so many moving parts. I mean, they're still teenagers. At least in the NFL, these are guys that are college age, certainly much bigger. That's something that we probably won't have an answer to for several years. Oh, yeah.
Player development here is huge. And, how teams, work with these young guys and as the young guys mature over time. So it's a very exciting time, though, and I know we'll see a busy trade activity, obviously, during the draft, but leading up to free agency July 1st, I think we'll see a lot of good action there, and it's going to be very exciting. And Dave, it was good to talk to you again. We'll have to have you on in the next couple of weeks to break down all the off-season movement that we'll see here soon. And if you're still in Buffalo, have a safe trip back to Philly or wherever you're going afterwards, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Dave.
And, of course, that's Dave Isaac from Philly covering the Flyers with the Courier-Post. Related to me somehow, either second cousin once removed, third cousin, 4th. Somehow we are. We'll figure it out one day, but he does a great job covering the Flyers. And, of course, you can follow him on Twitter at Dave G. Isaac, ISAAC. And then another Dave Isaac, who is from out here that everyone knows, normal host here of Real Hockey Talk and Breakthrough Sports with NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060. He's also out there covering the draft in Buffalo. And so, Dave, part 2, Dave Isaac from Phoenix. Jimmy's in here and Kevin. And so you would love the studio. When you get back, we'll definitely have to do some more shows here.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it. Hi, guys. How are you?
We're doing good. Dave, how about you?
Oh, it's great. On the news last night, it said, in Buffalo here, it said they're going to have a heat wave. And they said, it may even get up to 90. And I was freezing, actually. So no heat wave for me. I missed the 120 degrees of Phoenix. That's the heat wave.
That's the heat wave. Dave, before we get started really on breaking down the draft, I wanted to ask you, was there any, buzz about Vegas and the new team nationally, or is it just, let's wait and see, let's get the, stadium going and get the owners to vote on it, or is all the other media people really hyped up about it?
I think they are. I talked to a lot of people. That's one fun thing about going to the draft. I've been to many of them, usually go every year. And you get to see the same people, Kevin Allen, and then, Darrell Evans from the Kings, had a chat with. I even talked to Dave Tippett a little bit today. And it's a lot of fun. They're all, I think it's a positive response when they talk about Las Vegas. Every single one of the media people that I've talked to, and maybe there was 5 to 10 people, they think it's going to work very well in Las Vegas. They think it's going to create some really nice rivalries between the Kings and the Coyotes, being so close. They think it's going to, I believe, and I think the Visitor Authority of Las Vegas also thinks that it's going to even attract more people to the city, more visitors, and that's good for Las Vegas and the league, I believe, too.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it will be great. And I mean, like you said, and we were talking about earlier with Dave Isaac Part 1, is that how youth hockey, again, for the last 20 years or so, and it's something that some are aware of, but some aren't. I mean, if you weren't close to youth hockey before, but really you look out here, back when it was Desert Youth Hockey Association, Oceanside, even though at the time that and maybe 1 or 2 other rinks, Arcadia, but the talent level was great. These kids coming up even there in the 90s, and then it takes off even more. A lot of retired NHL players, they come here to live afterwards. So the youth hockey programs are run great. Great hockey minds helping the kids out, and really once you go, we always say, once you go to a game in person, and with Austin Matthews that was the case, you become hooked. And then you want to play, and, kids start going out there, and now it's just picking up even more and more. And with Southern California, we're seeing that, other places on the West Coast as well. And with Vegas, I mean, Jason Zucker was outstanding young player with Minnesota from there. And so you have kind of that level of interest that is really, picked up greatly over many years, but it's now to that point where I just think, now nationally and in different countries are really starting to see that as well. And it just makes for a lot of fun. But, yeah, I think it's going to be great with Vegas and the rivalry with the other Pacific Division teams.
And most of the media people also have commented how with Austin Matthews going number 1, how it really ups the stock of the West Coast. I mean, it puts Arizona on the map. It puts, LA's had some good players too, and there's, coming up the ranks. And I think that everyone's so excited that happened. Now he was the favorite to go number 1, not because he's from Arizona, because he's that good. Yeah. But it's very positive. It's one of the most positive drafts I've been to, where everyone's very excited. Everyone has renewed hope anyway, usually during these drafts, and a lot of fans from all over. People come from Calgary, you name it, from Florida, from Nashville. I saw people, and they're all cheering for their team. It's really exciting when you see that. The Buffalo fans are great. Every time they mention Toronto, however, there was a big boo. So I asked Mike Argello from, I think it's Hockey Buzz. Yeah. And he said he lives in Buffalo, and he said, that's just how it is. They're like the stepchild, the Buffalo, from the great, financial empire of Toronto. And that sells out forever and ever and ever, sort of like the Boston Red Sox. But Toronto's on the way up, too. They're very excited about Toronto.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, you got to be. You get that franchise center now that they haven't had since Matt Sundin, and more good young players on the way. And, there's some money to spend if they decide, to participate in the free agency per se. But you got to do it correctly. But so far they have. Now, we're coming up on a break here, but Dave, do you want to stay on the line, and then after the break we'll talk a little more?
I got a couple more comments. I'll stay on, and we could talk a little bit about Austin Matthews, the interview I had with him the day before he was selected number 1.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll get into all that, and, of course, more on the Arizona Coyotes and what they did. Obviously, the Pavel Datsyuk contract, the cap hit coming, and to move up to get Chychrun, and so we'll get into all that good stuff on some of the teams that maybe, even though we won't know for many years, kind of stood out and with the trades that happened. But, of course, this is Real Hockey Talk right here on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060. Greg, Jimmy Marshall, and, of course, our great producer, Kevin, and Dave Isaac joining us now from Buffalo. We'll be right back for more NHL Draft Talk.
Tune in to AZ Sports Talk with Rock and Manooch, your sports alternative in drive time. Weekdays from 3 to 6 on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060.
And welcome back to Real Hockey Talk right here on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060. Greg alongside Jimmy Marshall, and, of course, our great producer, Kevin. And Dave joining us from Buffalo, side of the NHL draft. He's up there the last few days, of course, covering the draft. And, Dave, on the eve of the first round there on Thursday, you got to go to the Bauer draft party, which, of course, Bauer, Austin Matthews signing the deal. And so, you got to talk a little bit with Austin Matthews. And we have some of the conversation up on our YouTube page as well. So, go ahead and go to our Twitter, twitter.com @real_hockey talk, and you can find some links to that, and we'll push it back out again. But tell us a little bit, about Austin, and, Jack Eichel was there as well. And, they've known each other, of course, from playing on the development team under 18. And so talk a little bit about that, his demeanor and, the buzz.
Yeah, they had both of them. Dave Fisher, communication director for USA Hockey, was the moderator, did a great job. He'll be on the show probably within a few weeks. However, Jack Eichel's quite a character. He's funny, but, he has 1 year under his belt, playing well, expecting big things from him. And, of course, Austin sort of looked like the younger brother up there because it's sort of new for him. He didn't know what to expect. I think Jack Eichel gave him some advice. I think it's on our interview where, just enjoy the moment, and that's good advice. There's no question. Austin, pretty quiet fellow, seems very mature for his age. He's, 18? I think he turns 19 in September, and he just seems very quiet and sort of an inner power to him. And when I talked to him one-on-one after they addressed the audience, he gets a lot of credit to the Coyotes, a lot to the youth hockey in Phoenix, which has just been sensational and keeps growing and developing. So he really honors the Coyotes, honors the state of Arizona. He knows where he's from. Nevertheless, if he had his choice, he didn't say this, I didn't ask him, but I'm sure he would have loved to play for the Coyotes. But we already knew he was going to Toronto, so no sense asking him the question. But he's happy to play. And when they come back, I think they play in December. I think Toronto comes to Phoenix. That's going to be a night to remember. There's certainly going to be a standing ovation for Austin Matthews that night. So check your schedule. I'm sure that's going to be a complete sellout. It's going to be a lot of fun. So he's the real deal, though. He's excited. There's no question. And his parents were there. What I always noticed on the big screen, especially the first round draft choices, when they call out someone's name, you always see the player. They're 18, they're 19, maybe at most. And they're always, they go to the mom first. They're hugging the mom, and they hug the sisters, the dad. So I thought maybe next year we can have the best hug award to see I think that would be cool. But it's an emotional scene for everyone. You know, and I felt there's some people in the stands today that actually came down, meaning the potential draft choices, hoping their name would be picked. And there were several just waiting, and I almost felt bad for them. They're waiting. They're in the stands. It's round 2 through 7. And finally, their name gets picked, and they just explode with emotion. But you can imagine, your whole life, you dream of being picked or playing in the National Hockey League, and it's a reality, and it's all those years built up emotionally, and it's the parents, everyone's just so excited. Very fun.
Dave, you said that he seemed very quiet. Maybe not that he didn't like to give interviews. But, boy, when you were watching the draft, a lot of news media outlets were interviewing him, and it looks like he handled it pretty well. He was going from one spot to the next spot to the next spot, and that's just really amazing. When you're the first-round pick, you got to talk to this group, then this group, and this group, and it's probably just the same questions over and over again. But from when I was watching, he seemed to handle it pretty well.
Yeah, and what I mean by quiet, he's very receptive to talking. I mean, he answered all the questions great, with enthusiasm, excitement, but he just seems to reserve his energy, and then possibly someone told him that because he is interviewed by everyone. Everywhere he went, people wanted to talk to him, and you gotta, it's almost like a marathon runner. You gotta pace yourself. So I thought he did a fantastic job. He's a good kid. There's no question about it. And maybe the word other than quiet is just a high degree of certainty and possibly maturity. That he's not like cocky, where some people are just off the walls. They're bouncing off the walls. He's very contained, very self-assured, very polite, and maybe that's a better word than quiet.
Yeah, no, and that's a great thing. I mean, being reserved like that and focused, never a bad thing. And so a lot of different personalities out there, and personality like that is fine. And others that show confidence in a different way, that's fine as well. And so it's, again, great to see these young kids get called up. And as you said on day 2 earlier today, some of the guys that weren't drafted, still sign with some teams, get tryouts, and others, could re-enter, of course, next season. And there's late developers, late boomers all the time. So, a lot of that will happen. And the Coyotes, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the Coyotes' first pick, his final ranking was number 9. So I don't think they were going to go after Matthew Tkachuk at all. I think they had their eyes right on Clayton Keller because they picked 7. His final ranking was 9. But he's done pretty amazing. I don't know if you've talked much about Clayton Keller. Of course, he's committed to go to Boston University in the fall of 2016, but he averaged 1.73 points per game with the U.S. under-18 team, in 15 and 16. I mean, 107 points in 62 games. And there's only one player that's collected more points in a season for the U.S. national team development program. And guess who that one player is that actually beat out the record
and
set the record?
Who was that?
Austin Matthews.
Yes.
So this is a guy that, somehow they saw obviously a lot of promise in. Obviously he's not going to make an impact next year because he's going to college, and maybe he should, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, and his teammate, Kiefer Bellows, so you remember Brian Bellows?
Mm-hmm.
So pretty cool stuff there, and
right.
I think they're very excited about him, 5'10".
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, an offensive dynamo. I mean, and here's the thing. The rankings don't matter. Every team has their own rankings, so even though a lot of lists might have had them 9, 10, 11, who cares? You take your best player available, and to each team, that could be different guys in different slots. And, Chaika, the Coyotes felt it was Keller, and I think it's a great pick. And that's what you want to do. You don't pick for need or anything like that in the first round. Later on in the draft, yes, sure, things could change a little bit. Everyone's sort of bunched together, but you take that best player available, you get that asset, because later on, if one, like you said, I mean, most of these players, aren't even in the NHL, or at least get to that effective point for a couple years. So needs change anyways, but you want to get that best player available, you have that asset, and then if you have a hole somewhere else down the line or in the system, you could trade one of your other young forwards and, get equal value as a defenseman versus, just drafting someone else because you think you have a need when it just won't work out. So it was great, and that's what you always want to do, best player available there in the first round. And, I love it. I mean, like you said, he, plays kind of like Patrick Kane. He has that skill set. And, go to BU for a couple years and, then play a year or two in the AHL, and then maybe 3-4 years we see him. Maybe even sooner it happens. But, very exciting time. I mean, another great player in the Coyote system.
I think so. I think they did actually very well. And then, of course, the 37th pick overall they gave up to acquire Anthony DeAngelo from Tampa Bay, who was the number one pick in 2014, I believe. So I don't know, Greg, what you think of Anthony. Are you high on him, or what do you know about him?
Well, here's the thing. You're a good offensive defenseman, and probably close to being NHL ready. Now, the thing is that there might be some off-the-ice things like that have come up. But the thing is, as an asset, it's great to have. And, but again, being close to NHL ready like that, they need that in the sense of young defenseman, offensive type of guy like that. So maybe, who knows, maybe we'll see him on the team next year. But the fact is, I think it's a very good trade for them. And, in Tampa, maybe have some other guys in their system, so they're kind of like, okay, he still has his value. We'll move him. Maybe he should go to a different, maybe a change of scenery will help, because I know last year was sort of an up and down year in a way for him. And so that, they recoup, they get a second round pick, it's like you said, the 37th. They liked the player that was there. And so that was part of the main reason Steve Yzerman did that. But again, I mean, a good young offensive defenseman like this, develop him properly. He'll be in the AHL again, of course, and and keep going from there. And so it's nice to have. But of course, the other young defensemen early on, and in the first round with the trade with the Red Wings, where the Coyotes took the cap hit of Pavel Datsyuk, and of course, they get the 16th overall pick, so they got to move up 4 spots as they gave up their 20th overall and 53rd overall, and then of course Joe Vitale. But getting Jacob Chychrun, who of course his dad Jeff Chychrun was an NHL defenseman, and so a lot of kids in the draft. The pipelines of families, it's fantastic. But with Chychrun, he's a guy a lot of folks had in the top 10. I'm not as high on him. However, the value of this for the Coyotes is very good, to get a guy like him. And, again, you develop him properly, take his time. He has that ability, where one day he could be that top-pairing defenseman. And so I understand why they did it. But for the Red Wings as well, I think it's a great move because they got to get rid of Datsuk's cap hit, where now they can go after Steven Stamkos and other guys. And they really didn't have to give up much. It was really just moving down 4 spots. And with all the rumors out there of what teams wanted with Datsuk to take his hit, it's actually a really good move, I think, for both teams.
And not only his father, the bloodline, you talked about Jeff Chychrun, his uncle, Luke Richardson. And, of course, he was a longtime hockey player, too. Remember Luke?
Yeah.
He's been around. I think he played on Philly for a while and moved to other teams. So he's got quite a bloodline. There's no question. So I think the Coyotes did well, acquiring more and more assets. First, Cam Dineen, number 68 overall, and Patrick Kudla, I should say, 158th, and then Dean Stewart, 188th. So, they're building up the assets. That's the way to go. I think it's smart. And I do want to say something about the Buffalo fans. It's very classy when Lindy Ruff from Dallas now got up to make a selection, the whole place showed their appreciation, and they cheered him quite a long time. So nice to see that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got to love that.
And real quick, as you mentioned, Patrick Hula, of course, he's committed to play at ASU this coming year. So, again, more great Arizona ties, and very exciting. And is Dave Isaac, part one, had mentioned earlier, Dave from Philly, on how, when you look at the draft, I mean, you don't really know the true winners or losers later on, but it seems like the Coyotes, when you get a sense of the picks they had and, of course, the trade for D'Angelo, it looks good. So if the proper development's there, you get some high-level prospects heading into already one of the best, if not best, farm systems. And so you're so deep, really, in terms of young forwards. But later on, there's good defensemen available, and with the Chychrun move and then acquiring D'Angelo. So looks good everywhere. Jimmy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to, Dave, I'm, reading all the, pundits, the experts and, ESPN, obviously NHL.com, Bleacher Report. Everybody's talking about Clayton Keller. Adding Keller to Dylan Strome, the number 3 pick last year, gives the Coyotes the making of impressive depth through the middle. And I think that's what everybody's looking for. The Coyotes, I think, did more last year than fans expected. Now, this year, I think they're expecting a little more. But they're building some great youth movement that they had that they really needed. I mean, they had sort of a farm system, but the players weren't really going. Now you're adding 3, 4, 5 guys in the last couple of years, and things look very, very bright for the Coyotes.
I think so, too. And, whether they make the playoffs this year or not, I'm skeptical about that. However, they're doing it right. They're building with youth. They're getting in position to really build from a long-term sustainable basis, and that's critical. Sometimes in the old days, long ago, they just get some veterans, sort of patch some places, get into the playoffs, but not go anywhere. But when you build and have some long-term prospects, it's like any business, strategic planning. You want it sustainable, you want it profitable, and you want to flourish. That's how they're doing it, and I'm very impressed. This year they did that, and I really think they got some players of the future. I'd be surprised if at least, I think Clayton Keller and I think Jacob Chychrun and maybe D'Angelo, they're NHLers, and I think you'll see that as long as they develop. And that's the key. It's a coordinated effort. You just don't pick, evaluate, and that's that. But you make sure they're developed in the proper way. And Clayton going to college will really help.
Yeah, no, it will. Like you said, the proper development is absolutely a key for these guys. And it's not just the high picks like Clayton Keller and Jacob Chychrun, but, the later rounds. I mean, you get those stills, and part of it is there's those late bloomers, and you develop them properly, and you see that a lot. I mean, some of the best teams, the reason they're able to stay on top for quite a while is that a lot of times they may not have really high draft picks because they're good teams, but they draft well, and Coyotes have been doing that the last couple of years. And you saw a few years ago with, Christian Dvorak, who's one of the top prospects in hockey now. Not a first-round pick, and he obviously had the skill, but he had battled some injury issues. And you do your due diligence because a lot of times there's those diamond-in-the-rough guys that you see in the middle rounds, even late rounds. You get final round, 7th round, and you still get guys that turn into NHL players, productive NHL players, because sometimes there could be just one little issue with them, and you do your due diligence, they work on that. And so it's always exciting to see that process here over time, and over the next couple of years, we'll know more about these young players from this draft.
Yeah, no doubt. And by the way, I mean, after Clayton Keller, the next 4, like we talked about, Jacob Chychrun, Cam Dean, Patrick Kudla, and Dean Stewart, they're all defensemen. So they're really trying to load up right now, get those assets going. They're not the biggest guys in the world. I mean, Dean Stewart, 6'1", 170. They're going to have to beef up a bit. and Patrick Kudla is, well, actually, he's pretty good size, 6'3", 175. So, but, they're hopefully they're taking the model from Pittsburgh Penguins, the speed model, the skill model. Well, so that may be the new thing in the NHL. I was talking to a couple people, media people, and said, yep, everyone, these small guys not going to be overlooked anymore, because Pittsburgh has proven speed works.
Well, right. And then Chicago over the last number of years. And there's the thing is that as a team and a system, you don't always want to totally change everything. But, yeah, like you said, because the clutching and grabbing's been gone for many years, that is one asset that is huge to have that team speed and to get these mobile defensemen. Like a D'Angelo, this move is good because, if developed properly, when he does come into the NHL to help the Coyotes, he's a guy that can move the puck up. And you need that now. You need is a fast-paced game. It's always been fast, but just the style right now, as you said. And so those mobile two-way defensemen are absolutely huge. And so that's a good avenue to go. And it's interesting because just a few years ago, with L.A. and then Boston, when they won their cups, they were more of those big crash and bang teams, forecheck. And so already changed a little. Not saying that teams like that still can't win, but I do think I would agree with you that in terms of speed, with how the rules are set up now and everything, it is vital in that sense to make sure your team speed is more than up to par.
Well, Chicago, I'm trying to remember his name, took someone that's, only 5'8", I think. But he's really, I think he scored 50 goals back-to-back in his junior league, and I'm trying to see, do you remember who that was?
Yeah, I'll find it here. And here's the thing with that, is that's another thing is that with prospects, the stats don't really matter per se, especially in junior hockey, because some of the leagues there are just high scoring and there's other facets of the game. But it also, with a player like that, could show that, hey, you have there is that ability to score goals if other aspects of the game are worked out. Those are the type of guys that in later rounds could really pay off at some time. But, yeah, sometimes when you look just at the stats, you kind of got to ignore that in some ways because the different leagues. But yeah, do you know who it was?
Yeah, he was, he was picked 39th overall, Alexander DeBrincat. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I pronounced it quite right.
Yeah.
But they're very high on him. I was sitting with a lot of reporters, and they go, oh, man, that's a find. This guy is quick, is unbelievable. 5'7", 163 pounds, but the guy can fly. I mean, fly. So a lot of talk about this guy.
Oh, yeah. In a couple of years, we'll see him up, and Chicago will have another diamond in the rough there. Second-round pick, as you said, 39th overall. And so Chicago, and they moved Andrew Shaw yesterday to Montreal, and, of course, got those picks, and I think that was one of them. But, and obviously, Shaw, the gritty type of player, third-line guy, but you could also put him in the top six if you need to. Type of guy that you want on your team come playoff time, and really will do anything to help this team win, and some offensive ability as well. But what's interesting here with the Hawks, Dave, Jimmy, Kevin, is that despite all the players they've had to move cap concerns over the last number of years, which really could be a playoff team on their own with all the guys they've moved out, they're still able to just always plug guys in because they have a good system. Or last year when they were able to sign Panarin, and of course, look, he wins the Calder Trophy, Rookie of the Year. Just amazing what they've been able to do. I mean, even though Bickle had that bad contract and they had to include, Teravainen in the move to move him. Obviously, Teravainen, great young player. Still got second and third round pick back. So, and with that cap space now, they can still be good short term in the sense of adding a free agent or more trades to be made. and then in the long term, they're still able to recoup some assets. So it's amazing.
It is, and if you've noticed, the NHL is kind of adopting what some of the Major League Baseball teams are doing. Stop going after the big-name free agents.
Yeah.
And build up through your farm system and let these guys play together for a couple of years, and then advance them, obviously, and they get to the NHL. But, yeah, I'm with you. The youth movement that they do and they go out and get a couple of key pieces, I think it works out good.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is like that. I mean, you're right on, Jimmy. That's how you win now. I mean, you got to build up that system and go from there and know when the time is to restock. And a lot of times, like you said, I mean, those big free agent moves a lot of times don't work. You don't at least want to build a team through that. Now, if you're at that point where you're ready and you go, okay, now we're that one piece away, then maybe you do that.
Right.
But I mean, that's the key. And we've seen so many teams over the years do that with hockey and baseball where they just spend and spend, but they may not have that farm system of young guys coming up, and then it kills them later. Right,
and if you see the way that hockey, the cap, I don't remember, the cap was just raised a little bit, but some of the teams look at that and they say, well, if we get one guy, we think we're set, where another team's going to say, I can get 2 or 3 marketable guys. And now with hockey, it's about getting a group of players playing together. You used to see quite a few trades in the draft. I mean, there were still a few, but now people regard the teams are regarding these picks as high end. Is it because the youth hockey's gotten that much better? What was it? 12 players from the U.S. Drafted in, was it the first round? It was 3 Finnish players were taken, and then followed by the Americans. So it's amazing how hockey has kind of, I guess the old cliche is rode the ship and everything, and a lot of the teams are starting to see that, and hopefully teams like Toronto and Edmonton and maybe even a Calgary, Vancouver is another one, build it up through the system and let's see what happens with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the key. And you said right on there, Jimmy, with Toronto and Calgary, because Calgary for so long didn't do it properly. They're at a point where they were kind of in the middle of the road. It's like, come on, you got to retool. They finally rebuild properly. They didn't make the playoffs last year, but now they're at a spot where, like they were 2 years ago, I think they have a great shot to make it next year and for many years to come. And Toronto obviously finally doing it right. Now, Dave, before our break here, before we let you go, any rumblings you can talk about, maybe moves that didn't happen in terms of trades, that maybe any whispers going around there that anyone was kind of talking about a little more than other things?
Well, not a whole lot, actually. There wasn't a lot of rumblings, because I was talked to a lot of these websites, Hockey Buzz, Hockey Future, talked to a lot of people, and I think the big thing now is just July 1st, free agency. So that's where everyone's focused now. Since the draft is done. So, but not too many rumblings.
Oh, yeah. And there's still a lot of trade discussion, and, of course, players are allowed to talk to different teams now that are going to be free agents as of yesterday, and but, again, can't sign till July 1st. Thank you so much, Dave. Have a safe trip home. This is Real Hockey Talk on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060. We'll be right back.
NBC Sports Radio AM 1060 is KDUS Tempe Phoenix and KUPD HD2 Tempe Phoenix.
And welcome back to Real Hockey Talk right here on NBC Sports Radio AM 1060. Greg Isaac alongside Jimmy Marshall and, of course, our great producer Kevin, and special thanks to both the Dave Isaacs. Dave Isaac from Philly, covering the Philadelphia Flyers with the Courier-Post, and of course our very own Dave Isaac from here, who is in Buffalo as well, was covering the draft there. So Dave Isaac's everywhere, and but now joining us, one of the best in the business in terms of prospect coverage, and I know that he is very high on the Coyotes' first round pick. Of course, is Pronman joining us from ESPN. And Corey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, guys. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, I know you're very busy, and so we'll get in quick about the Arizona Coyotes, and of course Clayton Keller, and your thoughts on him. I know before the draft I had seen some stuff that seemed to be very high. Obviously, an amazing skill set. And what could you tell Coyote fans about him? And what to watch for the next couple of years while he's at BU.
Well, the thing about Keller is that he does so many things well. I mean, you can watch it, but you can see the high-end skill and the high-end speed. But really, what's standing out to me about him is his hockey sense. He's such a smart playmaker. He makes one of the more unique and creative offensive plays I saw all season from some draft eligibles. And he's a small guy, but everywhere he's gone, he's produced. He was one of the all-time leading scorers at NTDP, and that produces guys like Patrick Kane, Phil Kessel, James Van Riemsdyk, many other very talented American players, and he's been right up at the top with all those guys. And I'm not going to say he's going to be that kind of star-level player, but it just goes to show how well he creates offense at the amateur level. And I think, he's going to vault right towards the top of the organization in terms of their young talent, and you can see him maybe being in the NHL within a few seasons.
Oh, absolutely. And, speaking of the young talent with the organization, I mean, their pipeline, obviously, over the last couple of years, especially up front, has been fantastic. Obviously, now we see Max Domi graduate to the NHL club, and then, when they acquired Duclair, there with the Coyotes. But with Dylan Strome and Dvorak, guys like that, in your mind, because I know you know not really about, all the teams' pipelines, prospects everywhere. I mean, would you put the Coyotes, in terms of potential and through their system, as maybe having the top farm system right now, or at least maybe in the top three?
Well, I wouldn't include Domi or Duclair as prospects in farm systems because they're already quality NHL players. Right. But yeah, they would have to be towards the top. If they're at the very top, I have to go through that over the next few weeks and kind of just dissect whether it's them, whether it's Winnipeg, whether it's Toronto. But they are absolutely in that discussion. I think when you add guys like Keller and Jacob Chychrun to that group that you mentioned, like Dylan Strome and Christian Dvorak, among the many other very quality prospects they have in their system, there's just so much high-end scoring talent. It's mostly leaned towards forwards. I think, Chychrun vaults right towards the top of their defense ranking just because they had very little young defense in their system. But overall, though, there is a lot of talent, and it's going to be very interesting over these next few years as they start to mature and get up to the big club and compete for ice time.
And speaking of Chychrun, in your opinion, how much development time do you think he'll need? Is he 2, 3, 4 years away in your mind? And also, what type of defenseman does he sort of project as? A two-way guy, a potential top pairing? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, being realistic, I would say, he probably needs to finish out his junior career and maybe a season in the AHL. So maybe you're looking at him becoming a full-time regular either at age 20 or 21. He's 18 right now. He's a two-way defenseman. He's not incredibly flashy, but he skates well. He moves the puck. He's very solid defensively in terms of his reads and playing the body. Not a guy who will be on the highlight reel, but he's just always making quality plays around the ice and being an impact on every shift. In terms of just in projecting him, I think definitely he has capabilities to be an upper half of the lineup player. Whether or not he's like a star-level defender, I'm not quite there. I'm not sure he has, the offensive upside for that. But, I definitely think he could be a very valuable part of the Coyotes team if he hits his potential.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, we're speaking with Corey Pronman, ESPN writer, prospects, one of the best in the business. Unbelievable, your content, how great it is, and for fans, and especially out here in Arizona with Coyotes and their rebuild, everyone really catching up on learning more about prospects around the National Hockey League. And real quick, because I know you do have to go, but in terms of the draft, now obviously it's years away from really seeing the winners and losers, teams that did really well at the draft. But from what you think, though, of potential of some of these guys and guys that you really like, maybe 3 or 4 teams that might kind of stand out to you as you feel will look down the line in a couple of years and go, wow, they did really well.
It's hard not to start with Toronto or Winnipeg on that front because I think they got 2 real foundational pieces, Austin Matthews to Toronto, Patrick Laine to Winnipeg. And they did you have some nice players that day too, but those two, players could define an organization for a decade. But if you look toward the other parts of the draft, I definitely like what Calgary did. I like what Arizona did, given those two players and one or two other guys they took on day 2. I liked what Edmonton was able to accomplish, and I also thought that given that they didn't really have high selections, I thought that Nashville and Chicago did well as well.
Oh, absolutely. And, Corey, I really appreciate having you on the show. Just great insight on the prospects and the NHL draft. And, we'd love to have you on again in the future, talk more young players, and really appreciate it.
Yep, sure thing.
And, of course, it's Corey Pronman, ESPN writer there, talks all things hockey prospects, and we'll talk to him more in the future as well about not only the Coyotes youngsters, as we talked about, but, upcoming drafts and all sorts of great stuff, development of these players. And you can follow Corey on Twitter at Corey Pronman. That's COREYPRONMAN. And so, again, you can see all his great content there, ESPN Insider articles. And, yeah, so, Jimmy, what an exciting time for the Coyotes fan base, and a very patient fan base.
A very, very patient fan base. And, we thought, a few years ago when they, played the Kings in the Western Conference Final that they were there and they just needed a couple little pieces, and then it kind of all fell apart. But we talked in the last segment as well, where hockey has kind of evolved a little bit. And hockey, it's becoming like the other, obviously, the three major sports. This has become a full-time 365 days a year. Like you were just talking about, maybe the guys get a couple of days off, but then here comes July 1st, and then we've got to, we're talking the free agency, and then, you got to set the teams, and then next thing you know, you're rolling into, opening up training camp and all that. So a lot of these guys that cover them, I think they would say the last few years have been more magical overall and more exciting for hockey overall. I think it's doing really strong. Back on the Coyotes end, we got a lot of news coming up, the arena and, getting the young players that we have. It looks like we got Shane Doan for another year. And
yeah.
So I think things are really looking up. And your casual hockey fan does, well, I'm just going to wait until the playoffs, or but for you diehards, it's every day you got to keep up on, because something is always changing. And that's how hockey has really changed, and hockey is growing very well, and obviously we see it with the youth movement in the U.S. With the players that were being drafted.
Oh yeah, it's just amazing all the programs that you have out here, and again, a lot of it. When you have these the players that are retiring and moving, whether it's Southern California or a lot of folks out here in the Phoenix area, and Vegas we're seeing, and so that's a big help. And what happens is, over the years, kids in youth hockey learn it. They love the game so much, and even if they don't go to a pro type of level as a coach or a player, they still kind of stay involved with youth hockey, and then their kids get into it, and they keep going and going, and then the intelligent level, the hockey IQ of the players coming up, just better and better. And as you said, with the Coyotes, will be a year-to-year type of basis, and wow, what a great year he had last year. I think the youth rejuvenated him a little bit, but, when they went to the conference final, the thing with that team is a good team, but obviously Mike Smith was amazing. But now they're building the type of team. Again, if done properly, they're doing it properly now. But if they maintain that, and the prospects in the system now, they're developed, in the good fashion, like the way Max Domi had been. That extra year junior was huge, not rushing him. Now you get to that point where, as you start contending, you have the type of team that can contend for many years. So, you could have the likelihood of making the playoffs. As great as the parity is in the National Hockey League, but you could be a team that year in and year out is in the playoffs, has an excellent shot to win a cup or two. And so that's a huge thing. I think the team from a couple years ago, even though they got far and the year before they had a good year, they're kind of put together. Dave Tippett just did a great job at that time, but it's the type of team that surprised that they obviously went that far. But now in 2-3 years, it's like, whoa, you got to like what you're seeing.
Well, when they played the Kings and went to the Western Conference Final, they avoided major injuries.
Yeah, that too.
And then,
yeah.
a couple years ago, the team started off good, and then they ran into injuries. They had nobody that could really come up and step up. And then the Coyotes stepped back, and they said, we really need to build up the farm system. We thought we had a quality core of players, and they just didn't work out. So, like we said, we mentioned before, they went back and they built it up through the system. And I'm with you. Reading all the the reports and everything, and you follow hockey a lot more than I do, but they definitely are definitely the top 10 for minor league, if not the top 5. They've got you name it. They were weak on goaltending. Now they got a couple guys down there that are ready to step in and do it. They were needed some defensemen. What did they do? They addressed it in the draft. Now they needed centers in the draft. What did they do? They went out and addressed it. So, things are looking really good for them. So you're just hoping that it turns out to be good. Like Dave Isaac too was saying when we had him on. I mean, it's hard to predict now, but are you predicting playoffs for the Coyotes? I think everybody would like to see it, but you have to see how everybody else is going to do, and again, you stay injury free and all that. But I think things are really looking up for them.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. And, the hardcore fans, they see that, and the casual fans are catching up with that because education on there on how the proper rebuild and the patience, though, the fan base has had with all the ownership stuff and now arena stuff over the years. And so obviously patient in that regard. But, Don Maloney, before he left, he started doing that rebuild properly, and the scouting staff did a great job the last few years. But now with Chaika, just even better and better, it looks like. Again, the player development part is huge in managing these assets, but you got to like what you're seeing right now from Coyotes management. And so that excitement level from the fan base will keep picking up. And as you said, with young goaltenders, I mean, Louis Domingue, who we saw last year when he came in, he did very well. And, he wasn't regarded as a great goaltending prospect per se, but he did a nice job. And maybe now he could develop into that guy that, will he be that legit number one goaltender? I don't know. But at least as an NHL goaltender, I mean, he's got to that point and should be in the league for a long time. And, he had some fun out there, about a month or two ago. They have, and the organization, the Desert Hockey Development.
Desert Hockey Development?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. My son, Mason, he's 5, and he loves the sport, obviously, as well. So we go out there quite a bit. I helped out a little coaching this time, and but Louis Domingue came out. And it was just great to see. I mean, obviously, all the kids, they love that, get to meet, NHL goaltender and how great of a guy he is. And so you wish all the best with him. And coming into this year, I mean, we'll see what happens because you have Mike Smith. Obviously he's on his deal. And, with Smith's healthy, he'll never be that Smith that we saw that year when they went to the Western Conference Final. But it would help if he could provide at least above-average goaltending. And then you have Domingue there. So we'll see kind of how Dave Tippett works that out, what happens in training camp with that. But, I mean, like you said, Jimmy, throughout the system now, things look good. And, we'll take a break right now. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the rest of the offseason, with free agency coming up, what free agents the Coyotes may go after, who would make the most sense. Obviously, they brought in Alex Goligoski already, who'll help their back end, and maybe a forward could be on the horizon in free agency or the trade market. We'll take a look at that. This is Real Hockey Talk right here on NBC Sports Radio AM 1060. We'll be right back.
This is Uncle Buck reminding you to start your morning with For the Love of the Game, the best general sports alternative show in the
And welcome back to Real Hockey Talk right here on NBC Sports Radio AM 1060. Greg Isaac alongside Jimmy Marshall, our great producer Kevin Gassman. And, of course, very special thanks, Corey Pronman joining us before our break to talk about not only the NHL draft, but the Coyotes picks and some of the top prospects they have through the system. Obviously a lot to like there with the organization, what they've been up to. And so, but now looking kind of in the immediate future, we saw the Alex Goligoski deal. They got his rights from Dallas, and they signed him to his 5-year deal. Now, of course, the Coyotes in the midst of a rebuild. You don't want to build through free agency, but they're at that point, though, where, even though he's in his 30s now, you get a guy that you think will age well, so even at the end of the deal, he'll be fine. He can help with some of the young players, and there's really that hole on the NHL roster in the back end. So now that with the way the young players, young forwards are coming up through the system and the assets that you do have, even if they're not a contender this year, by year 2 of the contract, the year after, next year, they should be fine or at least getting to that point. And who knows, maybe even this coming season. We know they won't be a cap team per se. They won't spend up to the $73 million, ceiling of the cap. But on the other hand, there's still flexibility, availability to make some more moves. They have the assets to get help. If they did move any young guys in a trade, it'd be to get other young guys back at, different positions per se. But looking at free agency, and, Jimmy, as we've talked about, not to build that way, but in terms of now where maybe there's some holes so they can plug going forward, I wouldn't be surprised if the Coyotes are in active discussions, at least, with some guys. But it's kind of tough to gauge who that would be. I don't see a Steven Stamkos type of situation, all the money he'd want, and I don't think it's the right time. I don't think Milan Lucic. A guy like Kyle Okposo, good player, 28 years old. So, again, even if you don't contend right away, he'll still be around. But there's some flaws in his game and things like that. So then you kind of go to a next list where you can maybe get stopgaps, some veteran guys that you can get on 1-year deals, things like that maybe don't help the club in the short term as much as one of the sexier names out there. However, it provides flexibility where they could still help the young guys and help still the team improve a little bit. And then they're not tied down to these guys. So when some of the other young prospects are ready and start pushing for jobs, because you don't want to hand the job to a young player, but you want them to, definitely earn it, you'll have more flexibility. In your opinion, Jimmy, do you think that maybe they go out and try to get a top 6 forward free agency that you'd have to give a multi-year deal to, like getting Goligoski, a top 4 defenseman, or do you see something where maybe they stand back a little bit and maybe just kind of let things play out and go from there?
It's hard to predict what they're going to do because they just went out and made a couple of trades and got the money. I just had his name from Detroit. And freeing up the contract for that. Yeah, like you said, paying Stahl. Was it $8.25 million? I don't know if that's really going to happen. So you're looking at some guys that are younger. Can they come in and can they be serviceable? I think that's what the Coyotes need to look at. Or do they say, do we take a chance on a guy that we've had in the system for a couple of years and bring him up? There's just, to me, and the game a lot more than I do. Do you gamble on somebody? I don't know. David Jones out of Minnesota or something like that? Is he going to turn around and re-sign with Minnesota, or what's he going to do? Is there somebody like that? Or how about Miguel Bodker that they turn around and trade it away? But it's hard to say what they're going to do now. I think they showed everybody that they're willing to make trades to, take on a big salary to help out the team. Now we just have to see what you say. July 1st is when it starts. What they're going to do. They still have some, like you said, holes to fill. Like you said, the forward and maybe another center that's a veteran. It's going to be really hard to think what the Coyotes hard to think or predict what the Coyotes are going to do. Yeah, no, it is kind of tough, and obviously now the free agents to be could talk to teams around the league. You can't talk numbers per se, right, but you can gauge interest, and then July 1st is where we'll see stuff. And, obviously, Mikael Bodker won't be back here. I wonder if he'll re-sign in Colorado, but he's an interesting name because he's never broken out, but he still has that potential. And he is 26, and
So he'll be an interesting name on the market to see where he does go. But, yeah, like you said, I mean, a guy like David Jones isn't a guy that would really help too much. However, again, he's the type of guy you could get for 1 year and, have flexibility if they did go that route, per se.
And they have a few guys that they need to think about signing on their own, right? A couple of guys. I mean, obviously they signed Shane Doan, but isn't correct me if I'm wrong, or somebody would call in and tell us Kyle Chipchura isn't he a free agent and they have to think about maybe
let him go.
Yeah,
is
it is it time to just let him go? So, but like you said, do they bring in somebody for a year? They a couple of guys that would come to mind, didn't they? They went after center last year, Boyd Gordon, because they thought maybe he could help out in the locker room. Now you're starting to see in hockey you got the serviceable guy. I mean, obviously we know Shane Doan, the captain. He's everything. He's the leader in the clubhouse. He's the leader on the ice and everything. But you need a couple other guys that are like that, and I think that's what the Coyotes need to do next. They need to get some of the other guys that are kind of the vocal leaders. So I'm with you. It's really hard to predict what they're going to do. And how much money is it? Have they announced how much money is readily available now after picking up a couple of contracts and everything and salaries? What they have left?
Well, a lot of it, will depend on some of their own guys, some of the restricted free agents. Once they agree to deals with them on how much their internal budget would be, because again, they won't spend up to that $73 million cap ceiling, but. There's still flexibility they can do. They can move Martin Hansel, who I really wouldn't move. On the other hand, he only has 1 year left. And I know there's been rumblings like, hey, David Backes, get that veteran center, bring him in. But on the other hand, he's 31. And a player like that could start dwindling down the type of style he plays, power forward like that. He's battled concussion before. Again, the leadership, and he could be a top 6 center iceman. However, when you get to year 2 or 3 of the deal, you might regret it. So, we'll talk a little more about that when we come back. This is Real Hockey Talk, NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060. We'll be back after these words.
Your morning commute just became more informative. Pro Football Talk Live with Mike Florio. Weekday mornings on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060.
And welcome back to Real Hockey Talk right here on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060. Greg Isaac alongside Jimmy Marshall and the Gasman, Kevin Gasman. And, of course, with free agency coming up, all the excitement, players are allowed to talk to teams now in the new CBA, that window open. Now, you can't really discuss numbers, contract details, but you could gauge interest, things like that, talk about the community. And so, there's been a lot of that the last day since it's opened up. And then July 1st, of course, is when you could sign contracts and actually talk numbers, that part of it. But so a great time coming up. And with the Coyotes, we talked about a little bit. It's just, again, I don't know what direction that they'll go on that, in terms of I see it like you want to have different age levels at the NHL level and through the organization. You may, on the back end, let's say, maybe you have 2 guys in their early 30s, maybe a couple guys in their mid-20s, and then you can bring in some of the younger players get up there and things like that. But, yeah, it is tough to really see. I mean, if there's guys that, will take shorter-term deal, would sign 1 or 2 years. A guy like Thomas Vanek, who's just spot out. He's not the player he used to be, so he'll be unrestricted. I bet he'll try to go to a contender on a 1-year deal, kind of to revamp his value a little bit. But if the interest isn't there or something like that, I'm not saying Vanek's the type of player the Coyotes could use. I'm just saying, as an example, a guy like that who isn't going to lock you down long term, so it won't hurt some of the young guys that are ready in a couple years. On the other hand, short term, it could help the team because you have enough of those young assets where you're not, as King Dean Lombardi calls it, in that black hole where you're like a middle-of-the-road team, but you don't have great young firepower, yet you're not good enough to win a cup. And, so because they've developed, or they're developing properly now, maybe you plug in a guy like that you can bring in the veteran free agent, early 30s, late 20s, on a short-term deal. In terms of long-term, Jimmy, it's tough. I mean, because, Steven Stamkos, great player, unlikely to happen. Obviously, I'd be extremely shocked. But, again, the other guys, if you want to go for that big body like Milan Lucic, again, you got to fork over 5-6 years, $6 million a year. You're just not in the position to do that, especially a guy like that. Even though he's just 27, 28, his style of play will start kind of wearing on a little bit. Louis Eriksson, who had battled some injuries but had a great year last year, he would be outstanding to pick up. Issue is he is 30, and even though he has had a nice career, because he had a 2-3 year window where he kind of struggled, had injury issues, was last year something that we'll see more of again in terms of good play and consistency, or is he going to kind of go back to where he was in that 2 or 3 year window before last year? Now at 30, again, you should have some prime years left. He's the type of player, if he's healthy, he could be good into his mid-30s. But, there'll be a bidding war on him, and will he want to come to a team that's not quite a contender yet? Well, maybe. I mean, he sees, like you said, Jimmy, Alex Goligoski, how excited he was to join the Coyotes. I mean, he got a good contract, but he's a guy, he could have waited till July 1st and joined a team that can contend right away, but he's got to like the direction of the team.
I think, and talking to the players, you said you talked to Michael Stone. Obviously, you talked to Shane Doan. You really wanted to come here. Teams have to decide. You're looking at the top free agents. I mean, I'll pick out somebody, Teddy Purcell from Florida. I mean, $4.5 million. Is that considered a good salary that teams can work around today? And do you want a guy that's serviceable as a winger? And how about somebody like Dan Boyle or Andrew Ladd? Then you got to think, Dan Boyle, age 39. How long are you going to have him for? But I guess teams have to decide, and even fans have to decide: is it worth spending $5 million on one guy and down to even $4.5 million, or do you go down and you get guys that are $2 million, $3 million? And maybe you can bring in 2 or 3 guys. And that's what's really changed about hockey. Like you said, somebody like Mikhail Bodker, everybody's waited. He's waited. Was he 26 years old? And 3.75. Is somebody going to really take a chance on him and figure, hey, he's finally arrived? Is it time for him to, step up and take over a team? Is it a team, maybe somebody that's just on the cusp of getting into the playoffs, or somebody that's always in the playoffs? So I'm with you. There's a lot of guys out there with the money. What did we say? The top, who was the top free agent guy? Eric Stahl making $8.25. Is somebody? You got to decide if you're going to spend that kind of money.
Well, with Stahl, he's gone downhill so much that he's only going to probably get offers of 1, maybe 2 years, and much less than the 8.25 cap. I mean, he's a guy that, he's still a good player in terms of maybe a third-line center iceman. When he signed that deal with Carolina, it's when he was still a first-line player. But he's gone downhill so much, and then when he got traded to the Rangers at the deadline, he's just awful. But again, a guy like that kind of could be a little bit of a little project you could bring in, and maybe in the right setting, he can kind of bounce back a little bit. But, yeah, I mean, the good thing with that is whoever would bring in an Eric Stahl, it would just be for 1 year, maybe 2 years to start. And he just kind of will have to get rejuvenated and see if he has enough hockey left, because he is only 31. He's played a long time. But a guy like that, I don't see anyone giving him more than $3 million a year. And, again, a lot of guys, based on the money they've had in the past, like you said, Jimmy, they'll want to make more. But he's a guy that will make a lot less. Dan Boyle probably will retire. But yeah, a lot of other guys, like you said, I mean, Andrew Ladd should be able to get a raise. And you get to the point, he'd be a nice player to have. Would he want to go to a contender, though, right now? Or is he willing, hey, whoever offers me the most term, most money, again, but he's 30 and a power forward, and you get worried like, but once you get to year 2 or 3, that's what makes it tough. I mean, you got to do so much due diligence, and but a guy like Bottker, like you said, I mean, it's tough because he hasn't developed. He's not young anymore, but he's in that prime range where if he is in the right situation with his speed and skill and the way the game is today, you would think, man, he could be a big help to a team, and teams may be willing to give him a long-term 4 or 5 year deal because he's only 26, will be 27 type of thing. But then on the other hand, there's that worry that, he's never really put it together fully. Right. Will he get more than the 3.75 average he was getting before? I think he probably will. So he's a guy that will get more. So it is interesting to see. Kyle Oposo, who was only at about 2.8 mil, I mean, he's a guy that could probably get between 5 and 6 mil. So he'll get a big raise in there. One guy I do like, David Perron, who did well after his move to Anaheim last year. I don't know what type of contract he'll get, but teams may be wary about giving him a long-term deal. So maybe he's a guy that Coyotes could look at. You can kind of bring in as a stopgap for 1 year, and he's still young enough at 27, 28. Let's say he has a big year and shows, he still has it like he did when he went to Anaheim. Then you can decide, hey, do we re-sign him long-term? Or maybe if they're not contending next year, you can flip him for picks or young players at the deadline. So maybe a guy like that. But, man, it's tough. I wouldn't want to be in Chaika's shoes right now.
No, and the players have to decide themselves now, am I going to take the money, especially some of these guys, like you said, that are in their maybe 32, 33, 34, are they getting their last contracts? Are they going for the money?
Yeah.
If they've never gone to the Stanley Cup, am I going to go to a team where I know I can get into the place? I got an opportunity to go to the Stanley Cup, and that's the thing that you really got to look at. So some of these guys that they're looking at, serviceable guys that you can get that can step right in, then you got to say, hey, we're a Calgary where we think maybe next year Calgary could really surprise a lot of teams, or are they still a year away? Or something like Toronto where we're talking, 2-3 years away? Edmonton, How many years do we keep saying Edmonton? Is it time for Edmonton to step? So does somebody want to go to Edmonton and do something like that? So that it's going to be really interesting, with the free agency. And I'm actually really excited to see how the NHL free agency, like you said, the new cap that they came up with, and obviously the players agreement, with the union and everything. So this year is the most free agents, I think, ever that the NHL has had, with the new collective bargaining and the way that they've done it, and unrestricted free agents. And so looking at SportTrack, I'm on SportTrack.com, but like you said, somebody like Eric Stahl, 8.25, and his career has just gone down. There's no way anybody's going to pay him that. So he has to decide, hey, do I want to go to a team that's going to give me the most money? Maybe somebody offers me $4 million and I'm willing to take it, or do you go to a team that's got a chance to get into the Stanley Cup and get there, and they're only going to offer you maybe even half of that? So that's something that we're really going to have to watch. But like you said, we're looking at Brian Campbell, 37, he's making $7.1 million. I can't really see any team paying him that.
Oh yeah, he'll take a lot less, and he may go back to Chicago. He was there for a while, and obviously, he went to Florida. One of his other old teams, Buffalo, you hear some rumblings about them, but I could see Campbell going back to Chicago. But yeah, at his age and stuff, probably he's still a good player, but probably a 1 year deal type of thing with Brian Campbell on a contender, and which Florida now is, so maybe he stays there. But yeah, I mean, he'll maybe 3.5, $4 million tops for a guy like that. At this point, and so that's the thing. Again, it's a lot of guys will be making less than they have, like some of the older guys, or a guy like Stahl, and not getting a lot of term. And that's the thing, because a lot of contenders don't have a ton of cap space. So some of these guys go, hey, these up and coming teams, they might not contend the first year I'm there, but man, right after that. But then for the up-and-coming teams, they got to also go, yeah, but do we want to be bogged down? What if this guy doesn't work out? Or if when we do start contending in 2-3 years, they're already, getting to that point? But, some of the names out there with Stamkos, I think there'll be, obviously there's a lot of interest. Whether he goes back to Tampa, but we know Detroit, after the Datsuk move, they have that cap space. sounds like the Islanders, and he's a good friend of John Tavares. Now, the thing is, Stamkos has said he wants to go back and play center, but would he be willing to play wing, to play with his buddy Tavares, to form a deadly combo that, oh, man, he won't be able to stop?
Well, and another thing to look at, what if they only offer him 2 years and somebody's going to offer 3 years? I mean, that's something you have to look at. The players have to look at, is a team really going to offer another a 5-year contract, a 6-year contract? I think you're looking at, 2 and 3 maybe at the most? So players have to decide, I got 2 years, or am I going to get, the 3 years? And that's a decision you have to make there. And like you just said, do I want to go play with my buddy? I want to go back to being, what I came into the league as. So do I do that, or do I take more money and, go to a team that's maybe not going to – it's really interesting. Sometimes I wish I was kind of in that shoes to decide which, where I could go with the money.
And yeah, I mean, and speaking with that with term, I mean, some of the guys, like a Stamkos, I mean, he'll get plenty of years. I mean, the max that Tampa could offer him is 8 years. The other teams around the league, it would be a year less. But some of these guys, yeah, they will get their 5-6 year deal type of thing, like we just saw with Golgoski and Keith Yandel. But, but then there's others, that, you'll see 2 or 3 years. And a lot of teams would rather that with a lot of these guys. But the bigger name guys, they'll get their 5 or 6 years. And there is always that risk involved. So, we'll see how that kind of works. But joining us right now, a former NHL player, of course, now part of the broadcast with TSN Team 40 or 1040 with the Vancouver Canucks, Dave Tomlinson. I'll say Dave H. Tomlinson, of course, because the other Dave Tomlinson, who was there around the same time in the NHL. But, Dave, how's everything going?
It's going very well, thanks. Yeah, I get confused with the other Dave Tomlinson. He spells his name with an H, T-H-O-M. Mine's T-O-M, and H is the middle initial, so even more confusing. But, I was a one-time Winnipeg Jet, and now I've transferred my skills into broadcasting, and I do the color commentary for the Vancouver Canucks, so I've been to Glendale quite often and seeing the Canucks face off against the Arizona Coyotes.
Yeah, no, it's always a lot of fun out here, when the Canucks come to town. And, obviously, 2 years ago, the Canucks got in a playoff spot. In my opinion, I thought maybe overachieved a bit with the roster they had. Last year, though, they went down a little, that struggle again. Now with a high pick, you bring in the great young defenseman of the system, but it seems like Jim Benning, they don't really want to rebuild type of thing. Now, what's kind of going on there with Vancouver? Do you see them being active in free agency where they try to bring in immediate help now, even if it might be giving out contracts that you might question a little? Or is it maybe a retool where they look at the trade market, try to, maybe bring in some other young players? How do you see things kind of playing out?
Well, the Canucks, from ownership on down, local ownership, the Anquilini family from Burnaby City, just outside of Metro Vancouver, they want their team to win. They want their team to make the playoffs, and they also want to get younger. So those are hard things to do all at once. The season you talked about 2 seasons ago, Willie Desjardins' first year, they did make the playoffs. They saw Calgary in the first round. They had a better team on paper and thought they could get by Calgary. That didn't happen. Last season, this past season, was a step backwards. Injuries took the team out of its rhythm. Some key guys went down. New acquisition, Brandon Sutter was hurt, and their mainstay on defense, Alexander Edler. Those 2 guys went down in the same game, and the Canucks just didn't have the depth to recover throughout the end of the season. They had a lot of young guys in the lineup, and with young guys, there's going to be growing pains, and there was that. It was a travel-heavy schedule for the Canucks the first 30 games of the year, and they never recovered, never got their footing, missed the playoffs, then kind of lost out in the draft lottery because the percentages would have put them third. They dropped to fifth, and they still want to, as you said, add to their group and be competitive. So they will be active in the free agent market. Louis Eriksson is a guy that they've targeted. He's a player that would mesh lovely with Henrik and Daniel Sedin. The Sedins have a couple more seasons under contract, and they're still the offensive engine for Vancouver. And then the local boy, Milan Lucic, the former Vancouver Giant, former Boston Bruin, and LA King, who's now a free agent and is open to have teams talk to him. And Jim Benning knows him Benning was obviously with the Boston Bruins in 2011 when the Bruins beat the Canucks in the Stanley Cup final, and knows Lucic very well. So that is a fit, but do the dollars and do the years make sense? And the answer to that is probably no, because there's about 15 other teams around the league that would like to add Milan Lucic and would probably overpay years and dollars. And so the Canucks are going to have to be up against some healthy competition there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, and speaking, of Lucic, even though, in the prime, still in his 20s, sometimes, not all cases, but the type of game he plays, power forward, once maybe you hit the early 30s, even though you still should be in your prime, sometimes maybe it goes a little down, because all the bumps and bruises you take, perhaps. And do you think that's something that could come into play with a guy like Lucic or a David Backes, who, still fantastic players right now, but teams might be a little more leery on players like that, on giving out the 5-6 year deals because of worry that maybe their bodies won't hold up as much?
I'd say absolutely. I think that any general manager that is trying to secure Lucic, Backes, would probably realize that the back 2 years of a long-term contract deal aren't ones in which he's going to be making the impact to the dollar. So you try to structure that contract so he's getting more of his money in the first couple of years, maybe some trade protection in the first couple of years, so that you get the best out of the player for the first couple of years. And then if you're looking to build and hit a home run and have things come together and have some success, then you get the best out of that free agent signing over those years. Vancouver specifically, they haven't quite formed a succession plan for Henrik and Daniel Sedin. So if they want to continue to be a win now and get younger players into the lineup at the same time, they're probably going to have to overpay to get a player to come in if it's an Eriksson or it's a Lucic. And again, then the latter years of that contract, you kind of just have to grin and bear it.
Oh, yeah. And one good thing might be, it seemed like last year in unrestricted free agency, there weren't as many as the crazy deals handed out, per se. And who knows? I mean, how stern some of the GMs may be. And if it's around the league like that, maybe it gives more option for teams rather than having to give the 5-6 years to maybe do 3 or 4 type of situation, which, I mean, for a lot of teams would be nice. And, with Vancouver, I mean, with Lucic being the hometown boy, maybe that could be another selling point there. But, yeah, I mean, what do you think with the Pacific Division, Dave? You have obviously the 3 California teams, and they'll still be fine next year, good teams. But then you look Calgary also had the kind of the rough year last year, but, with all their young players and their back end, and we'll see how Brian Elliott will do there. They're on the way back up. Edmonton, if they can get a defenseman finally, they should be on the way back up with all that talent. Coyotes, great young system, and now they're bringing guys in, and and we'll see Vegas soon. But I mean, how good and tough is this division? And I mean, is that part of the reason why, because of how the parity is, that I know you mentioned because of the Sedins, as they get up there in age, you want to contend, but is that also part of the reason you go, ooh, wow, we really can't do a full rebuild because of just how great all these other teams are becoming?
So, yeah, the problem there is the California teams haven't taken a step back at all. And then you've got the teams like Calgary and Edmonton, where Vancouver is getting a lot of their points from during the regular season. They've strengthened. Calgary solved their goaltending with Brian Elliott. They've got a new coach in Glenn Gulletson, who was the assistant coach in Vancouver the last couple of seasons, so he's going to know Vancouver inside and out. The Flames are going to be tough to deal with, and there's always been some healthy rivalry games between those two stemming back to 2 years ago in the playoffs. And then Edmonton, they got the goaltender that they wanted, and Talbot still didn't have a back end that they were proud of, and they're still looking to try to get that defenseman. And you expect that they're going to make a deal to get a defenseman. They feel they've got the inside track money-wise on Milan Lucic, and that would add to a power forward role for the Oilers that they've been trying to fill with a bunch of different guys over the years and have failed to do so. And, I mean, the Oilers, they finally go back in a draft lottery instead of move up to get the first overall pick. And then what happens draft day? They get Pajärvi drop right into their lap, another skilled two-way finishing Finn who can play the left side, and again, a bevy of young players for Edmonton to choose from.
Yeah, no, of course that gets to happen to Edmonton, and yeah, I mean with all those forwards, we'll see what defenseman they can get in a trade. In terms of getting a top pairing guy. I mean, obviously they don't grow on trees, but they definitely have the assets there. And of course, we're speaking with Dave Tomlinson, broadcaster, color commentator at TSN 1040 there in Vancouver for the Vancouver Canucks. And, Dave, looking at the Canucks in general, the NHL club, and then also what they have coming up through their system, is there anyone maybe that stands out to you as maybe someone that, and perhaps it could be a young player that maybe isn't talked about as much, that you think has, another level or so that they can go to really kind of help the team out moving forward?
Well, there's a wild card player who came and joined the team at the end of the season, but Trampkin, big Russian defenseman, about 6'6", and a real good skater. And honestly, he played maybe a handful of games with the Canucks after coming over, finishing his KHL season over in Russia. And I didn't see him get knocked off his feet once. I mean, here was a big, sturdy defenseman who could play well. Struggles with the English language. First time for him playing in North American ice dimensions, and yet was solid. Was knocking guys over, not just off the puck, but over. And for someone to get just dropped into a poor Canuck team, really fared quite well. And so that's a young defenseman I don't think anybody else really knows about unless they played against him in the last 10 or 12 games of the season. So Trampkin's going to be a name that if he comes to camp in shape, could just be dropped right into the top six. Obviously, the trade for Gudbranson adds size for the Vancouver Canucks. And then for big-name guys, well, they're really pinning their hopes on Thatcher Demko, just a standout goaltender for the Boston College Eagles, who signed a contract, is going to turn pro. He won't start in Vancouver. The Canucks are set in goal with Jacob Markstrom and Ryan Miller, but he will get the bulk of the starts down in Utica. And, he is really who the Canuck fans are excited to get. If you can have him under his rookie contract, be the starter in a couple of seasons for Vancouver, that just alleviates some cap room for you, and hopefully they can use that money to bring in some scoring. That's the biggest weakness right now for the Canucks. They don't know who's going to put the puck in the net for them. And the other player, the up-and-comer, Brock Besser, who just finished the standout season at North Dakota and won the national championship, he's going back to North Dakota. He's not going to turn pro, so they're going to have to wait another year to get that finisher, and again, might have to find that in free agency. Oh,
yeah, absolutely. And it's a great time right now, especially for hockey fans out there. Free agency coming up, and there'll, of course, be a lot of trade talk going on around the National Hockey League. And there's like many Christmases throughout an NHL season or even after a season. Draft time, free agency, of course, the Stanley Cup final, NHL playoffs in general, training camp, start of the regular season, the trade deadline. There's just so many great things. And then the World Cup of Hockey we'll have again coming up. And so very fun time. And Dave, it was great to speak with you. We'd love to have you on again, especially, throughout the year when the Coyotes and Canucks get together. We could do some previews of those games and things along those lines. And do you have a Twitter or anywhere some of the fans may be able to follow you?
Absolutely. My Twitter handle is @DTSN1040. And I'll tell you what, the Canucks schedule came out just a couple of days ago. I looked to see when the season starts, when the season ends, when the Christmas break is, and then when we're down in Phoenix. So I know those dates already, and I look forward to talking with you when the Canucks battle the Coyotes.
Oh, perfect. And we'll be in touch, and very special thanks. And, of course, it's Dave Tomlinson, color commentator, analyst, TSN Radio 1040 in Vancouver for the Canucks. And it's going to be a lot of fun this offseason, across the National Hockey League. We've already seen it come up. And, of course, Real Hockey Talk flies right by. Very special thanks, Jimmy Marshall, for joining us. And, of course, he'll be here for Hour 3, which is Breakthrough Sports. And myself, Jimmy Marshall, former Atlanta Falcon Ed Smith, as well as the great Kevin Gassman, producer. for Hour 3. But we're done with our hockey talk. Dry your eyes. I know it's sad, but we won't be here next Saturday. We'll be enjoying the 4th of July weekend, but after that we'll be back for more hockey talk, and we'll talk about all the moves that will be happening through free agency. But this is NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060. We'll be back after this break with Breakthrough Sports.
NBC Sports Radio AM 1060 is KDUS Tempe Phoenix and KUPD HD2 Tempe Phoenix.